Welcome to Best Decision Ever, where we believe that life comes down to very few moments and decisions. So on this show, we highlight the very people that had the courage to overcome fear and start their business, begin writing that blog, or just stand up for what they believe in. But on this show, we also know that success is only one part of the story. So we dive into the challenges that our guests have had to endure to get their current point of success, so we can learn their mindsets and habits and apply those to our own lives. For those of you who are new, my name is John, and I'm your host. And today, we have a very special guest. She formerly ran the program on human rights at Stanford University. During her time studying human trafficking, she found a gap in the support system that was needed for human trafficking survivors. They needed a way to create a new life for themselves. And she believed that she could help them do just that. So she taught herself to be a full-stack software engineer and took those skills to start AnnieCannons, which is a nonprofit that is on a mission to transform the lives of human trafficking survivors through teaching them to be software engineers. Without further ado, we have Laura Hackney. Thank you for coming on the show today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And let's start with the basics. What is AnnieCannons and why is it so important?
Absolutely. AnnieCannons is a nonprofit. We're based in Oakland, California. And you said it beautifully.
Thank you.
We really want to be a point in this ecosystem, the ecosystem that's addressing anti-trafficking, anti-gender-based violence, and really focus on how we can help people with that long-term support and long-term reintegration through career pathways. So it's something that we're really passionate about, that I'm really passionate about, because we were seeing over and over again people being caught in these cycles of exploitation. And so much focus was being spent on how to get people out of those situations, but not as much focus on how to help them sustain lives free of exploitation. So that was really the catalyst of why we started AnnieCannons and why it still exists today.
Yeah, and I love us talking offline too, just about how big of a need you're filling, right? Where there's really a gap in when when the survivors of human trafficking get out, what is that next step? What support services are there for them to actually create that life? I really appreciate that. It's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of amazing organizations doing work with legal aid support and case management, transitional housing. All of those things are so important. But one of the things that can make someone vulnerable, that can make any of us vulnerable, is that if you don't have that financial independence, and if you don't have that economic power in a lot of ways to be able to support yourself or support your family. And really, it goes back to this dynamic between being stuck in a situation or being forced into a situation that's all about power and control versus your own agency. And so when you have access to these types of opportunities, you start to develop your own agency. You're able to make these decisions that are best for your life and for your future.
Yeah, you're really putting the power back in their hands. And AnnieCannons, your name is not AnnieCannons. I'm almost tempted to call you Annie. So who is AnnieCannons is really the better question.
Yeah, I do get called Annie.
I'm sure you do.
Lot.
I'm sure you do. I was almost tempted to go Annie, but I know it's not Annie. I know it's not Annie.
Yeah, and we had someone who's instrumental in starting the organization who had reddish curly hair, and so there's a lot of Annie references. But AnnieCannon was a woman in the early 20th century who was hired with a number of other people by this astrophysics professor at Harvard. And he thought they would do sort of basic data entry for him. It's a group of women who's like, they're going to be doing this these basic tasks to help with my research. But they actually ended up discovering all of these things about the stars that we didn't know. Life cycle, composition. They created a classification system for stars. They wrote all of these things in these beautiful thesis and different manuscripts. Some of them became the core textbook for astronomy for the next several years at Harvard. Didn't get any recognition at the time. Most of them were told to go home. And I think we really like this story because it's about a group of people whose society has undervalued or has certain biases around what their potential is. But they contribute, and they contribute to STEM fields, and they're able to make these huge advancements. So we really liked, and Annie was sort of the person who kept trying to bring people into that space. So we really liked her name, and we've read a lot of her letters and journal entries and things like that. She's very fiery, so she's a great person to learn about. And we also didn't want the name to be about someone's past, but more about what they can do, because that's really, we spend most of our time thinking about and talking about what people can do and what they can learn and what they can build, and not about their past. But the past informs a lot of things, and everyone has these different experiences that they bring. So it's creating space for that, but then also thinking about someone's future. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that focus that you just mentioned on the futures. It's easy, as we would talk about with a lot of guests on the show, where our overcoming our past is so important, right? To be able to then step into a new future. It's not like necessarily, at least I would phrase, it's not like you're not getting out of something, but you're getting into something new.
Yeah.
Right? I'm sure you have to help people through that gap many times.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a great way to put it. I think we sort of shifted in some of our thinking as well. There's a lot of emphasis on being trauma informed, and you can be informed all day about something, right? And so we sort of a number of my coworkers have started saying, we really want to be healing centered, and so just thinking about how it's an active process, it's an ongoing process, and sometimes when you're going through something and you're healing from something, you might need a break, or you might need to learn JavaScript, right? And so just creating those different pathways and creating that, I think one of my favorite things about AnnieCannons is getting a group of people together who even just getting to class can be challenging, but then we'll have these spaces where suddenly everyone comes together and we have I call them magical pivots.
I like that.
Where suddenly everyone pivots and focuses their attention on learning something new together. And it's just a great way to kind of remap pathways in the brain, but also just to kind of create that sense of community and that sense of no matter what has happened or what we had to overcome to get to this place, together we can pivot and learn something new.
Yeah, I like where you're getting people to, you mentioned creating new neural pathways. Yeah, getting them to refocus on something new and really, really dive into that. Let's take a step back though. I'd love to understand, as I understand it, you were at Stanford and then you started AnnieCannons, from what I understand. What was that process like of you going, okay, I think I want to go and start this organization. I don't know how to code yet, right? What was that like for you?
Yeah, exciting and terrifying.
Okay.
It was sort of I'd spent a lot of time in the research world, very comfortable. I had been managing the human rights program and then had shifted into a new role working at Stanford. I just created the International Policy Lab, International Policy Implementation Lab. It's always a mouthful. And I had this amazing boss who's become a mentor. And so was just, I think, getting to that point in the work and doing a lot of research and seeing things from macro levels, policy levels, looking at how, as a researcher, you can be sort of a convening point for nonprofits and local governments and all these people, trying to bring people together to work on these issues, and just getting frustrated. I think there was a lot of frustration. I think a lot of well-meaning and well-intended conferences and convenings and task forces and all those types of things, but just hearing over and over again from survivors and from survivor leaders that there wasn't a what's next. There wasn't a what happens, there's all this good intention, and I feel that coming from this movement, but it's not actually having an impact on individuals. And so a lot of it also came from sort of looking around and seeing what types of careers or career opportunities are going to be ones that could be a good fit. And at that time, coding boot camps were popping up all over the place. And I was, full transparency, I was skeptical. I was skeptical of technology. My relationship with technology has changed a lot over the years. It's like a dance, right? But I think the idea around teaching someone a skill that they could then take into lots of different industries that they could do from home, which has turned out to be really important in a pandemic. But that it's that kind of continual process of self-learning, and that technology is changing all the time. So even if someone's been in the tech industry for 20 years, new things come out that means, we're all kind of starting at the base of the mountain in our learning, and that people were teaching themselves and having these career pivots. And so we started working with a number of groups doing the bootcamp model, and a lot of groups who are trying to promote inclusion and diversity in tech. So it's how can we kind of create a curriculum that increases that accessibility? Because a lot of coding boot camps were really, really cutthroat and really you've got to be coding 12 hours a day. You have a 5-minute break, you can go cry in the bathroom, come back, keep working. And it just seemed horrible.
Yeah.
So how can we take the, like, what you need for that kind of job, what skills do you need for that kind of job, but then make sure that it's accessible, to make sure that it's, so many of those like sample questions were like, Bob's playing golf today, like help Bob, and it was like, what are we talking about? Like, what is this? There's just a lot of assumptions and privilege and all of these things baked into the curriculum. So sort of deconstructing that and then bringing in a lot of experts. We had a volunteer CTO when we first started, and she was wonderful in sort of helping us bridge the gap between how do you teach things that are very practical, but then once someone has those practical skills, bring the theory in as well. So that when someone has gone through and you've said, you've learned how to write this for loop in JavaScript, and so you know all the syntax and you know where the semicolon goes and you know why you use it, but now every programming language has some structure similar to that. And here's why it's so important to learn why that structure exists. So kind of bringing a lot of that in. Her name's Aisha Leone. Just throw out.
Right. Yeah, there you go. Shout out.
Credit where it's due. But it was just, kind of continuing to build our curriculum, and it's always changing. I mean, the curriculum, every single cohort has changed dramatically. And I think that's because we've adapted it to make it better, but also because technology is changing. So that was a long-winded way to say technology seemed like a really great fit. It's something we could teach, it's something that people could learn. And then also one of the sort of unintended byproducts is I remember the first time we took a group of students to a tech conference. And someone asked one of their students, what do you do? And she kind of looked at me and she was like, can I say I'm a web developer?
Yeah.
Can I say I'm a web developer? And it was like, have you developed software for the web? Yeah, okay, yeah, then you can. And it was just that moment of someone saying, this is the first sort of way I've been able to talk about myself without using words like survivor.
Yeah.
Or victim, unfortunately, is a word that's still used. But that was just a really exciting thing too, where you don't think about like how, when you're navigating and making choices in your life, how you're able to then identify and talk about your work and what you're passionate about and what you're interested in. So that was exciting as well. So it was kind of pulling all those pieces together, having a lot of support. And then, I was the first person to go through the curriculum. So it was very fun. And then started teaching, and we launched our first cohort in November of 2015.
Wow. It sounds like it's been quite a journey for you.
Yeah.
Really, it has been. So let's dive in. You said a lot of amazing things, and I want to start with, though, what was it like when you had to teach yourself to code specifically? Just with I'm talking specifically just having the confidence to do it, because that's really what your students are going through too, right? Of when you talk about self-learning, what was it like for you to go through that? Because a lot of people, whether they want to do that, they want to start their own business, they have an imposter syndrome of oh, do I know how to do this? Or am I qualified to do an interview, right? You know what I'm saying? How did you work through that?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in some ways I was kind of lucky because I knew I'd have to teach it. Okay. And when you have to teach something, you know you have to learn it really well and be able to answer a lot of questions. So that was a really good forcing mechanism. But I think the thing I like to say about technology is that it's a lot like learning a language. Mm-hmm. A lot of it is about learning the core structure of things, and then just exposure and repetition, and you pick up things, and you pick up I didn't know I knew how to say the word for this random thing, but then you learn it, and then it kind of just gets seeped in, and you sort of start to accumulate things. One of the things I found really interesting is I went into coding thinking I need to learn how machines work. I need to learn how machines operate. Okay. But that's not the case. It's how do humans think?
Yes.
So much so. And so it was interesting learning that, because I would be looking at code and I would be like, oh, I can tell how this person solved this problem. And I can tell how, when we set up, the compiler in browsers, right? And the easiest way to teach a browser compiler to someone who's just learning it is imagining two people having a conversation. And so you kind of anthropomorphize things, you make things, and it's also, I didn't know how fascinating I was going to find a lot of it. I remember the first time I learned about the physical infrastructure of the internet that I had completely taken for granted. I didn't know anything about fiber optic cables and the fact that the ones and zeros traveling into my computer were actually light waves or radio waves or electricity, and I'm just I never thought about it. And so just kind of constantly feeling like, I feel like there's the sort of other side of that, which is where it gets very competitive and people are reporting knowledge and they're very like, oh, if you don't know this, then you don't know whatever. And it's sort of like, if you can just put all that aside and just say, okay, yeah, you do your thing, like that's fine for you, that's whatever. But just getting people excited and fascinated by it. And I think so many of our teaching engineers and people who've gone through our program, it's that kind of like curiosity and fascination around like, did you know that they just, that W3 just released this new feature, and isn't that so exciting because it'll solve this problem, and that thing that we spent 5 hours debugging the other day, now there's this new thing. It's sort of, I think that's the energy that really keeps people going, because it's that almost, the analogy that we use all the time is like, we're not training people to be heart surgeons, because that's a like, you gotta get it right. You gotta know everything about everything, and you have to get it right. I'm assuming I'm not a heart surgeon, but
it's a good example. It proves the point.
Right, and then, but as a software engineer, so much of your job is finding things and tinkering with things. And if the first time you run a program, you have a bug, that's great because you learn from it and you figure out, oh, that was what caused that, and now I know so much more about how this system works because of that bug than if it had just run perfectly the first time. And so it's kind of getting people used to that idea of it doesn't have to be perfection. The messiness is what's really helpful in you learning and you growing and being a better developer. And that is so helpful for people first starting.
And what we talk about the messiness and the journey of learning, what do you say to a student that is like, I just don't think I can do this. Like I'm struggling. I have this stuff in my past that tells me I literally can't, or at least if you interpret it a certain way, right? Like, because that's a common problem. If you even there aren't a survivor, or if you want to call them that, human trafficking, just people doing face general face. Like, how do you help a student through that?
Yeah, I think we sort of have two ways. One is in the curriculum itself, so making sure that we're introducing concepts where there are lots of little wins. So it's like, so here's a thing, let's try it together. Here's a similar thing, you try it, like getting the button to show up on the page, getting the button to click and do the thing.
Things.
Like and then daily algorithm exercises. Like here's a prompt. Let's pseudocode it first. Let's like write it out in plain English, like how you would solve this problem. Then let's start pulling in code to do it. I think the other piece is that reframing. I'll never forget one time I was teaching and a student got to that point where I just remember she like sat back in her chair and was just like,
oh yeah, I
don't get it.
They just shut down.
I'm tapped out.
Yeah.
It's like Stack Overflow. I can't. I'm not. And it's so. And I was like, I have so much empathy because I know exactly what that feels like. I know exactly what it feels like to hit that wall. And I just remember like asking her like, but you want to know, right?
Yeah.
And she was just like, yeah. And I was like, okay, well then you want to know. You don't know now, but you want to know. And that's the most important thing because that's what's going to get you there. And it sort of like broke things out. And then it became a classroom joke where when people wouldn't get something, they'd be like, I don't understand. I want to understand,
Yeah, it's perfect.
But it was just that kind of like getting people used to that idea of especially if you've just learned something new, people put so much pressure on themselves of like, I have to
guilty.
I should know this by now, or I should know this better. And I remember one of our teaching engineers one time turned to a trainee and was just like, you literally just heard about this for the first time, for the very first time. Like, go easy on yourself. You'll get there. So,
yeah, I like that point too about just the patience that the student has to have with themselves to learn, go through the shit, excuse the language, but and allow yourself to make a mistake and be persistent and do it at all possible with some joy and stay focused on that for a better next 20, 30, 40 years versus, because it's just, I like that point. My question to you is, how do you then stay patient and, dare I say, empathetic with people as they're going through this? I assume, because I get frustrated with, I get frustrated with other people, even in my own life when I'm trying to teach them something or get them to get something, even myself, I'm like, don't you just get it? Or like, what I'm saying, how do you stay patient with people, especially when they just shut down, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's definitely days where it's just like, oh, today was really hard. Like today things just didn't land. It was tough, like we didn't have the right, like everyone came in and there was just something about the day. And I think just also recognizing like you're gonna have days like that. You're gonna have days
Oh,
when
okay,
things
interesting.
when you don't, it doesn't click, and that's fine. And that, I mean, that's sometimes it's needed to just have a day where you're like, nope, it didn't work. But I think a lot of the that sort of patience piece is, I don't even know if I'd call it patience. It's more of like helping people get the barriers out of their way.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's themselves. A lot of times it's and a lot of times it's like, I'm so tired because I had a job where I worked a graveyard shift last night, and variables are not going to stick in my brain right now.
Yeah.
So kind of accepting when things like that happen, but then when it comes to helping people get out of their way, and just helping say, and just reminding people over and over again, on day one, if I had showed you this thing from 2 weeks ago, you would have said, I don't understand any of this. But now you understand that thing, and that thing's simple. And so it's continuing to say, like, what's now in your toolkit?
Mm-hmm.
You have all these things in your toolkit, and just because this new thing is like confronting your toolkit, it's okay. I do think a lot of people in the tech space hide that. There's a lot of duck syndrome going on with people. And like one of the things that I've noticed, and I've personally experienced, is a lot of fear around contributing code to a project, like using GitHub and version control, and the fear around, I'm going to push code and it's going to mess everything up, or I'm going to pull code and I'm going to break everything. And just trying to normalize that, and trying to put up these things where I'll say, this is your branch, this is your thing, like explore it, build things, take ownership, like enjoy having this like little world that is your cloned copy of this code repo. And then when you're ready, we'll take a look at it and we'll see like where the barriers were, where the blockers are, where we need to merge things and all of that. So it's kind of creating those spaces where people know that it's not, I feel like so many people with technology, not just people I've worked with at AnnieCannons, but in all parts of my life, it's sort of like, if I push this one button, the computer will explode. And so it's just kind of trying to demystify that in a lot of ways.
And it almost seems like there needs, so obviously, as we talked about, there's like this room or space you set up for people to make mistakes, and like you encourage them to do. But there's also, as you mentioned earlier at the trade show, one of your students saying, "Oh, I'm a software developer." Like there's this, I'm obsessed with this like paradigm of like identity change. Like, people need to go through identity changes to really succeed. Like, how do you help students go through that? And maybe it might be what you just said, but how do you help people go through that identity change of like, okay, I'm no longer a survivor of human trafficking. I am a software engineer. I'm an independent person. I have ownership of my life. How do you help them go through that?
Yeah. I mean, everyone's different, everyone has different stories. Everyone, I think for some people it's how do I create an amalgamation of the fact that I do want to be known as a survivor leader and sort of have one door in this sort of social justice type work, or in the space of wanting to help make sure that other people have access to opportunities. And also, I am a software engineer and I can use these skills to move things forward in different ways for my career, for other people's careers, those types of things. Some people also are like, I want to completely move on from that identity, and I want to be able to think about, and not just, I think one thing that's also interesting is, I think one of the things that I've heard from a number of people is that like it goes from survivor being a sort of marker of identity to not just one's career, but all of these other things in their life. So it's sort of a moment of being able to look at, whole list of identities. And that's really exciting
like
too.
roles.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not just that I was a survivor and now I'm a software engineer, but now it's like I'm a software engineer. That's how I can navigate in my work world. But now I also have these other things. I'm a mom, or I love pottery. Just want to spend my weekends doing pottery, and or I just want to, spend time planting trees in the garden that's outside of where I live, and those types of things. So I think part of all of that sort of healing is seeing how this one sort of career piece fits into what you're able to then shape, what you want the rest of your life to be, or what you want at least this season of your life to be, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I think that's also really exciting because one of the things that I'm also really passionate about is encouraging and hearing about other people's hobbies. I have a lot of hobbies.
You do have a lot of hobbies. I know we were talking right before. I was like, wow, you've got a lot of hobbies. Okay.
But it's just
That's
like
awesome.
when people are kind of doing that like amoeba, like reaching out and learning new things, I think it helps all parts. I think learning about pottery helps you be a better software. I mean, you just.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. Maybe a couple years ago I wouldn't, but I agree. Like, it's all tangentially.
Yeah.
It's all learning, right? It's
Yeah.
all learning.
Yeah.
Right. It's interesting. Let's transition a little bit and talk about just like the growth of. May I call it a business? Or should I call it a nonprofit? Is it okay if I call it a business?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what's like the growth of your business? Like, it's such a mission-driven thing. Like, a lot of companies like have a mission and like it's great, but like at the end of the day, they sell software. Like, you know, but then there's like you who like you are very mission-driven. How do you balance like your mission with actually like the growth and the scale? Kind of like what we're talking about off camera. How do you balance the two?
Yeah, I actually don't think we balance.
Okay.
I think one of the people that was really impactful in the growth of AnnieCannons, who's Grace McCants, and she talked about the phrase, the mission is the leader.
Oh, okay.
And so it kind of takes away any sort of one person, any sort of one necessary outcome, but it's that mission. And so as people who are working in this organization, the mission is the leader. And that's been really helpful because I think over the course of growing the organization, we've definitely tried a lot of things. We've shifted, we've been agile in some cases, and I think we're really landing in our strong suit in sort of what we want to be able to do. And that is being able to provide, long-term and deep impact for each individual going through our program. So it's not necessarily about the number of people or the number of software projects we're able to build or those types of things. And I think that's changed a lot. And I think there are a lot of outside forces, not necessarily bad forces, but who are trying to get us to say things like, we're going to reach X number of people by this time, or we're going to be in this number of cities by this time. And I think we want to continue to grow, but growth for us also means the quality of our programs, the kind of impact that we have, where are people 6 months out of leaving our program? How are we continuing to, what does that engagement look like? What does our ecosystem look like? What does our alumni network look like? All of those types of things. So I think, the credibility piece and the sustainability piece is so important. And at the end of the day, we are a nonprofit. So we're always thinking about, operationally, how are we going to be able to keep doing this work? But I think we've shifted the answers to a lot of those questions to be about that individual journey. How can we meaningfully replicate providing those opportunities for as many people as possible and have outcomes, have clear impact that we want to have, but also, again, when you're an organization that's sort of built on this idea of helping someone tap into their own agency, you do have to kind of let certain things come about over time and sort of be molded over time with the decisions that people are now making because they've been able to take advantage of those opportunities. So yeah, I think when we veer off from mission as the leader, that's when we can get into trouble.
Yeah.
Or that's when we can sort of go down paths where we're like, oh, we're trying to act like a tech company right now. And we have built a lot of software products for a lot of different amazing organizations. But at the end of the day, we're not a tech company. We're an organization whose mission is to help individuals, access these opportunities and tap into their own potential. And I think there's just a lot of pressure to go into different directions on both sides, both on the sort of nonprofit side and on the tech company side. But it's staying in that focus. And part of my work is kind of staying
making sure that everyone stays in focus.
Yeah. While making sure that the participants who are going through our program have a voice in our program design and what that looks like, and that piece can always be changing, like how we deliver our curriculum, how we create support structures around our curriculum and for our students and all those types of things. That can and should change and be responsive, but the mission is the one where it's kind of like we all need to be focused on it.
Okay, so it sounds like it derives all action should derive from the mission, which then creates the ecosystem, and then if you follow that, you'll get to wherever you need to go.
Yeah.
So my question to you then is, how do you get yourself on a more personal level to stay patient in doing that? It's a hard thing to not want to go for the vanity metrics. So we have graduated this many people, we've built this many software solutions for companies. Like, how do you do that?
It's really tough. I'm also totally going to use the phrase vanity metrics.
Please do. Please do.
That's great. I mean, I think when there is that balance of wanting people to know and be excited about the work that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really figuring out how to best talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we've always really struggled with, it's always been really hard, is we've never wanted to tell survivor stories. So we've never wanted to say, so-and-so experienced this horrible thing and all these tragic things happened to them and then they got to you. Because it's not my story to tell. And the story I can tell is about what AnnieCannons is trying to do, what our staff, what they're working towards. And it's always been really hard because we've always been pulled in that direction. Like, people have always said, tell me a story. Tell me a story. That's how I can connect.
Yeah.
And that's so human, right?
There's,
Hearing a story to understand. And so that's always been really hard to balance that, especially as a nonprofit, especially in this type of space where there's so many stories out there of people, those types of things. So that's always been challenging, but I think what we've tried to find is the people who understand that and understand that we're not going to exploit someone for their story. If they choose to tell their story, we want to support them and give them a platform to do that. But that we also have just the focus on, this is what we want our impact to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Does that resonate with what you see in the world or the problems that draw you in the world? And so I think it's just sticking to that. And it has been tough. And we have made a lot of shifts even recently around, we used to talk a lot about economic power delivered and talk about the number of dollars that outside companies were paying us to build their software that was going directly to survivors. But a lot of that became so focused on that, telling that story of the earned revenue of the organization, as opposed to the focus on individuals going through our program, which is a longer story, which is harder.
It's a harder thing, because it's really inputs focused.
Yeah.
Whereas and this is a metaphor that I'm going to really try to extract back to life, but it's like you're focused on inputs. You're really focused on inputs, and you don't you use the outputs to kind of inform you. It sounds like, but you really are focused on what are the quality inputs.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is hard.
It's hard.
It's hard.
Yeah. And it's also something that you can't see as easily. You can't see someone's change in perception of their own capacity. You can't see that. It's hard to quantify that. And so there are a lot of things that you can't see, and there are a lot of things that we would choose not to show because it's not anyone's business besides the person who's experiencing it.
What personally drives you to keep going? What, in the simple sense, what motivates you, right? Like what gets you going to want to keep doing that?
I mean, the first thing that came to mind is the people that are going through the program. I mean, that's pretty like B2B. But I mean, it's true. I think there's the, because one thing that's really amazing is that people seeing people go through the program, go through these changes, learn these things, and then their ability to then turn around and say, oh, here's how we can make this better, because here's what I experienced, and here's how I can help this other person. And so now it's like watching this network. It's like watching all of these people contributing into this thing to make it better because of their own experiences. And that's so motivating. And so I feel like now I'm having the ability to, when there are times when I'm like, I need to just get out of the way. I need to just
let the network do its thing.
And so I think that's really exciting, because I can then use in certain cases, I can use the privilege that I have because of who I am, what I look like, all those types of things, to continue creating support systems for that ecosystem. And so that's really exciting, because it's a change from like being in it and being like building the thing to now the thing is being built by the people who should be building it,
Yeah.
and then I can contribute. And so that's really helpful. And then I think also, I know we were talking about this earlier, but also creating really strong boundaries for myself around the
that's
work.
really good.
I think for a long time, and I know a lot of people experience this when you're starting something, you're in it 24/7.
You're in the sauce, man. You were in the sauce. People don't even get like,
You're having like I remember like there was a period of time where I was having like coding dreams, like so many, and now it's like I think being able to put those boundaries around and then get a lot of that sustenance and sort of self-sustaining energy from other types of things, as well as the work. But I think, because again, you are going to have bad days, you're going to have tough days, things where stuff doesn't work out or you don't get that particular partnership or grant or whatever it is, and being able to lean on those other things. And also one of the, beautiful things is, I think now when I tell staff members or something like that, like, oh, I'm gonna be out for a week, I'm gonna take a vacation, they're like, yes, good for you, go do. Like everyone's just like that supportive, like we've all put so much into this that we all want everyone to be okay. Like self-care is not just like a term. It's sort of like, yes, you need to go do that, because I know when you come back you're gonna feel better, everything's gonna be better, you're gonna be doing better work. And so that's just been really fun to see, like the number of like heart emojis we give to people on Slack when they're like out of office today. It's like, yes.
I love it. It sounds really, really healthy. Okay, the question of the hour. As the founder of AnnieCannons, what's been your best decision ever thus far?
I mean, it's sort of a circular question. I think it was co-founding. I'm one of the two co-founders.
Okay.
Co-founding the organization. I think it was making that decision to leave a relatively stable job, where I knew what was coming. My work ended at 5. I didn't take work home with me, kind of thing. And diving into something that was unknown and quite scary, and didn't know sort of what would come out of it or what the outcomes would be, if it would work. We had so many people in the early days that were like, I don't see how these two things fit together.
That's so hard to hear too when you're just getting started.
And then when we were trying to get people to hire us to build their software, we got a lot of, I love what you're doing, but I need to hire a real developer. Like it was literally like tap tap on the head kind of thing. And so I think that there was just a lot of that fear. And I had, again, so many great people around me who saw the vision. Co-founders saw the vision. I saw the vision. A lot of our volunteers, and we sort of had, again, the privilege and the opportunity to try it. And we had people in that first cohort who were and are extraordinary, and who are building mobile apps and all that kind of stuff now. And so I think it was just that, like, and I definitely had that feeling of, we're sort of having questions and pushback, like, well, we can both go and work in industries and make money and kind of be comfortable and then do this type of work. And I just had this, like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to wait. I want to try this thing as soon as possible, because these are the types of things that I don't think can wait. But then it was also making sure, like, where do we fit into the ecosystem? Like, we don't want to recreate the wheel. We want to try to support all of the other organizations doing this work and be this value add piece that exists. What's been tried? What hasn't worked? How do we partner? How do we not just sort of be our own island, but how do we collaborate? And so it was a lot to kind of think about and navigate in the first year until we got our first, it wasn't really like an angel investment, but it was like our first large donation where someone was like, I want you to try this thing. I want you to try it. It was like, oh, okay, it's going to happen. That was probably the best decision.
Transitioning a little bit before we ask the final question, I do want to talk about your hobbies a little bit. What hobbies do you have? You do have some interesting ones. So I thought, I usually don't ask it, but I'm curious. What hobbies do you have? Why do you have them in general? Why is it good for people to have hobbies? Like, yes, talk about this.
Oh, well, that's great. Yeah, I feel like they change all the time. So I'll like dive deep into something, and I think that's great. And then I'll kind of move on. Not move on. It stays with me, but just kind of focus on different things. I started taking an astrophysics class. Super interesting. I don't know how people spend their whole day thinking about things like galaxies emerging, or like the size of the universe. Like one person I met a couple days ago, his entire research is just on the size of the universe. And
it's a little quote unquote spacey, you know? Like,
I was like, how do you go to the grocery store?
Yeah,
how do you function? But that's super interesting. A good friend of mine shared a book with me called The Overstory by Richard Powers, which is a lot of sort of trying to fight away this idea of human exceptionalism and really talking about the natural world.
Interesting.
And how in our interaction with the natural world and all of that, and just so many things I didn't know about trees. I just feel there's so many of those different types of things that are really fascinating and I get really into. And then, just talk about learning Icelandic.
I know, I love that. There's you have so many hobbies. I find it fascinating. Question: where can people learn more about you, more about AnnieCannons? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So AnnieCannons.org, and there are lots of ways I think to learn more. We have a lot of information about what's happening with our training program.
Mm-hmm.
If you're interested in hiring developers to build your software, you can hire AnnieCannons. We build web apps and mobile apps and websites. We build stuff for a lot of amazing clients who are doing really cool things in the world. And then, I think one of the things I'm also just really passionate about is people learning more when they hear something about human trafficking, and suddenly there's that heaviness and there's that weight, which is valid and real. But it's also about learning about how you can get involved. But I think it's a lot about that education piece, and we have an amazing person who does a lot of our social media and stuff like that. Who's always posting about education, but also like what people who experience these types of things are then able to do, or what they need, or what that. And so I think as a society, I think we need to do more listening. Especially of people who've experienced these things, because I think a lot of times people dive in and they're like, oh, I think I understand trafficking because I watched that one movie, and so now I want to do these things. And I think there are so many people doing great work and so many survivor leaders saying this is what's needed, or just listen, like just hear what's happening and learn more about the issue and become more informed. And if you start to feel overwhelmed, here are some other things you can start to look at, but just stay engaged. Check it all out.
Absolutely. And final question: what advice would you have for someone that is on the other side of a big decision? Maybe kind of like you, they want to leave their 9 to 5 and start a company or start a business, or maybe they want to move across the country, or heck, maybe they want to change friend groups, whatever it is. But what advice would you have for someone that's on the other side of a big decision?
I think that when you're out of alignment with yourself.
Oh, I like that. Okay, I like that.
Like you always know.
Yeah, you know.
And there's always that like thing if you're doing something that's off. And I think whether it's a small decision or a big decision, who you have around you in your life, a part of you always knows. And you can choose to listen or you can choose not to listen. And I think the more often you're listening and the more often you're finding that alignment with yourself and with the people around you, everything's going to be better.
Yeah. So it's like listen to that inner voice and stay aligned with that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been amazing. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to listen to the inner voice and make that decision. Really appreciate it. Apply these lessons you've learned here today, and we'll talk to you soon. See ya.